Hello, everybody, and happy Friday. We are live ahead of the United States Grand Prix qualifying. You probably know me. I'm Adam from F1 Fantasy HQ, but joining me once again is Tom from Pop Panman F1. Tom, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me. I had a good time last time, and I'm excited for another hour of stress.
Last time Tom was on, he was in between which chip to use, and he spent the better part of 45 minutes stressing over it. I think this week I will be right in the hot seat with him because we're both debating a chip this week, and it's going to come down to the wire. So, some quick procedural notes before we begin. If you have any lineups that you'd like us to review, head on over to the FanAmp app, select the Fantasy Formula base, and drop a screenshot of the lineup you want us to review. Our producer will drop it into a slide deck that we'll share on screen, and then Tom and I can review your whole lineup live in front of everybody. And that goes a lot easier than trying to read it through the chat and visualize it. Also, while you're in our base, you can answer our contest question, which is on the bottom of your screen here. Which Haas driver will score the most fantasy points this week in a heavily upgraded Haas? So the winner of that contest will receive $50 to our sponsor, Fifth Gear Garms, and have the opportunity to change either my team name or my normal co-host, Rob, for next week's race. You can see my team name was rechanged to Papaya Power Racers. And over in Texas, Rob is getting ready to attend qualifying himself. So hopefully Rob and the FanAmp team have a great time this weekend.
Do you think Rob's like at the track just with his phone out, like watching the stream right now?
I hope so. Rob, if you're out there, do say hi and I'll be sure to call you out. And so, Tom, you just entered the top 1,000 teams in the world after Qatar 2 weeks ago. You've got a big decision ahead of you to stay in the top 1,000. Tell us where your head's
at. It's everywhere. It's all over the place. It's a complete mess. This entire week has been the most stressful week of my life. Okay, maybe slight exaggeration, but honestly, it has been stressful. I've been and ahhing. I've been flicking around, changing my team around throughout the week. I've been looking all through Twitter, X, looking for information, scraps of data, quotes from drivers. I've been listening to podcasts from the official F1 podcast, listening out for little bits of information about how good these upgrades are for Mercedes, etc., etc. Mercedes look pretty decent, to be honest, from FP1. And even before FP1, I was thinking Mercedes might be quite good. And Lewis Hamilton's been strongly on my mind this week because he's so good around this track, and because Mercedes had that upgrade, and because he was good in FP1, and because I'm pretty much decided that I'm going to be using the triple DRS boost today, which is a pretty massive decision, to be honest, all be told. And I feel like Lewis Hamilton is, if budget wasn't an option, I could pick my favorite 2 times, then I would put it on Lewis Hamilton. The trouble is Lewis Hamilton does enable me or force me rather to do some surgery on my team to get him in. So at the moment I'm debating, do I do that little bit of surgery, which would probably require me to drop someone like Piastri to someone like an Albon to fit him in, or do I just stick with this current team structure with the kind of new template of the triple McLaren, Verstappen, Red Bull, budget driver like Guan Yu Zhou, and then just put like George Russell in that slot? That George Russell Perez Sainz slot has also been playing a lot on my mind as to who the best option is. And I think after FP1, I'm kind of leaning more away from Sainz and Ferrari kind of in general, just because I'm a bit concerned about maybe even the reliability after what happened in Qatar with Sainz's DNS. That kind of concerns me slightly. But also just that Mercedes just look good. And I know a lot of limitless chip users who are activating today are kind of piling in on Mercedes, so that makes me definitely think that Mercedes are a good option for my team as well. So yeah, I'm kind of leaning towards going in with the triple DRS boost. The question really is, do I put Lewis in and do the surgery, or do I just keep the team structure and put Russell in? There is one other alternative build which is a little bit out there, but I can actually get to it with 3 subs, and I can get there with 0.1 in the bank, and that is going kind of all in on Mercedes without using the limitless chip and setting myself up for Mexico and Brazil, where I think Mercedes will be strong. And that is literally dropping the McLaren constructor, which sounds very extreme when you're not on limitless, but dropping them for the Mercedes constructor, dropping Piastri for George Russell, and that means I do have to kind of run 2 budget drivers in this build, where I'll be running Guan Yu Zhou and Hulkenberg. But Haas with that upgrade looks like maybe that extra budget driver is kind of a smaller price to pay, and getting the constructors right on this sprint weekend is really, really important. So that's definitely another build I'm considering, kind of going all in on Mercedes and just kind of abandoning the McLaren ship altogether. Although I think that's a bit drastic, so I'd probably be playing a bit more safe with some less major changes. So yeah, that's kind of where my head's at. Like I said, it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
I can feel the tension mounting, and I think there's a lot to unpack here. A lot of themes related to our one practice session in FP1. Let's look over at the classification from FP1, because I think there are some themes that you had touched on in there, Tom.
Sure.
First off, Lewis Hamilton. This is a track that Lewis has never finished below P4 at. He's only finished off the podium once. He's on 3 straight P2s, including last year in a W13 that was either porpoising or was a lawn tractor. So really impressive record at this circuit. And then also he was running P1, P2 with Verstappen for the first 30 minutes. And then in his last flying lap, he had 2 purple sectors and then came up really quick on a McLaren where he caught some dirty air. I think he had to slow down more than he would have wished, lost some time in the 3rd sector and wasn't as impressive, but he was really cooking on that last flyer. So perhaps that new Mercedes floor, this floor that's going to predict their whole development pattern for 2024, is yielding those dividends. So very, very interesting week to bring Lewis into the fold.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say for sure, because we've literally got one practice session, then it's like, bam, that's it. You're done for the weekend. You've got to lock your team in and cross your fingers, hope for the best. So it's always hard on the sprint weekend. But, going into FP1, like, we all kind of knew Lewis was kind of a god around this track. And in FP1, he certainly looked really strong in terms of that qualifying pace, just a couple of attempts off, and probably would have been closer, like you say, if it wasn't for that kind of last couple of corners coming up on that McLaren, and maybe got into some dirty air and lost it a little bit. But even if he doesn't qualify like on the front row, I just trust Lewis and I trust the Mercedes race pace. So it is kind of tempting to go down that road.
Absolutely. And you can see the top of the timing sheet here. A lot of familiar faces. Verstappen, as always. Charles Leclerc, consistently P5, P6 at COTA. Another really safe driver this week. Sergio Perez, consistently on the podium here, but his recent form has got me sufficiently spooked. And no matter what lineup I run, it won't contain him this week. Only as maybe part of the Red Bull constructor. Yeah. But then when you move to the bottom of the grid, there are a few things that really stood out to me. One is that McLaren ran mediums the whole time. So they sunk to the bottom of the timesheets, and we don't really know what their true race pace is. So McLaren leaving us with a bit of a mystery. Meanwhile, Aston Martin leaving us with a different kind of mystery. Lance Stroll lasted 5 laps before they had to totally disassemble his car. Fernando Alonso never got off of his hard tires and never got out of P18, P19 the whole session. So really weird hour when you're trying to assess those two teams, especially Aston Martin, who brought upgrades this week.
Yeah, poor old Aston Martin. They've got absolutely, well, they got nowhere basically in FP1. I think Alonso came out for 20 minutes or so. Stroll had like 4 or 5 laps. So Aston Martin really on the back foot, and I'm definitely not even close to considering an Aston Martin asset, to be honest. Yeah, I'm still really kind of, I don't know, before I promised myself before I came on the stream, like I'd have a clear idea of exactly the team I wanted, and I've come on here and it's just like, no, don't have it. There's literally like 3, potentially even 4 builds I'm still stewing over. So yeah, it's going to be one of those final hours before the deadline where I just gonna have to pluck up some courage and click a few buttons and hope for the best, I guess. But yeah, FP1 was a tricky one to read. Like McLaren not doing those soft runs is kind of a nuisance. That kind of tells me maybe they don't have any concerns about their qualifying pace and they're just going to be fine. They want to just focus on the race. And it also tells me potentially they're kind of worried about the race and they're like putting extra effort into working out the best setup for the race. And they're just kind of like, oh, okay, we'll qualify kind of wherever, and we'll just trying to optimize the race. But yeah, it's kind of surprising that even in like the final 5 minutes, they didn't stick some softs on. So definitely a hard one to read. And I think it's putting a lot of people off McLaren, particularly anyone that comes in without without watching what's happened and just see McLaren down the bottom. And they're just people are going to be dropping off McLaren like pretty rapidly. Tough one to read for sure. But yeah.
Let's head over to the chat. It looks like we've got a lot of activity building already. Hey to PP Patty and to Mike. I know you guys have been on a few of these shows. Hello again. Hi, DesX. I see Rob is out there. Hey, what's up, Rob? Hope you're not sweating too much in that Texas sun. So we got Silence in the chat who asked if we can get a little insight into some of the team selection. So you heard from Tom a moment ago. He's in between a few 3X DRS builds, or perhaps something that gets Lewis in at the 2X chip position, or maybe pivoting to something a little bit more traditional and just saving it for a rainy day. So he's of a few minds there. Steven, you asked where in the FanAmp app do we post the lineup? So when you enter the app, there's going to be a bunch of great bases, a lot of our partners that have different podcasts and other shows. But if you look for the fantasy formula, if you go into the very first tab of lineup advice, you should see a lot of other lineups already populating in that chat. Just drop a screenshot there. Transfer asks, can I change my team and then apply a limitless? So Tom, stop me if you've heard anything differently, but all signs I've seen tell me if you make transfers now and then apply limitless, it's not going to matter. And those price changes are just going to revert back to your Qatar team. Do you agree?
Yeah, that's what I've seen. I've not actually tested it myself. I probably should have used one of my kind of second or third teams to test it at some point, but I have seen several people on social media, etc., explain that that's exactly what you just said is going to happen. So people have tried to make transfers in order to try and like maximize price gain, that sort of thing. But then when it comes back out the other end of the weekend, you're kind of just back to where you were originally. So from what I understand, it's not going to have any impact. So if you're going limitless, just pick your limitless team and don't worry about anything else.
Never look back.
Yeah.
DB in the chat says 3X for Max for me. Selling signs, but for Perez or Russell with the 2X, I would say we need to see at least a decent string of form for Perez before I would trust him with the 2X chip. 3 events means he has more opportunities to fly off the track if something goes south. What do you think, Tom?
On Perez, was that, sorry?
Perez or Russell for the 2X chip if you're using a 3X?
I actually have a sneaky feeling that Perez is going to have a good weekend. However, I have kind of completely lost faith in him. It's kind of a bit of a contradictory statement, I suppose, but I feel like this is a kind of a track where I feel like Perez is going to be good here. I think the Red Bull is just going to be strong in general, as we've seen across the season. Perez, he's got Mexico coming up next week. He's probably in some good moods, some good spirits near his hometown sort of thing, being in Texas at the moment. I feel like Perez is going to have a good week. I don't think he's going to necessarily get a double podium, which is what he should be doing, but I feel like he's going to be all right, to the point where I've even considered just leaving him in my team. But because I've kind of committed to using this triple DRS, I need a solid 2 times DRS. And although I've kind of thought about leaving Perez in my team, I don't trust him enough to put the 2 times on him for sure. If I'm considering moving him out of my team, then there's definitely no way I'm going to double up on him as well as having the Red Bull constructor. I'm effectively tripling up on Perez when the last couple of races have been pretty dire. So for me, if it's between, in that slot between Russell, Perez, and even Sainz in that, I think Russell is the best pick. And that's kind of where I'm at with my team selection at the moment. Do I just make the straight swap, keep the triple McLaren, swap out Perez, put in Russell, 2 times him, 3 times Verstappen, and be done with it, and then kind of have that template going into Mexico? Or do I kind of put all my eggs in that Mercedes basket, thinking that Mercedes is going to be strong over the next 2 races post COTA, so Mexico and Brazil, where they have been good, and I think the track should suit them, and just go all in with the Mercedes constructor. George Russell kind of go ham and just leave only Lando Norris as my McLaren asset. That seems really drastic, and if it backfires, it could be really bad. And it feels almost like, because I'm in the top 1,000, it's kind of a risk I don't need to take. However, if it works, it could be a masterstroke, and it could soar me into the upper echelons of the top 1,000. So yeah, it's a really tough decision to know what to do. How do you feel? I feel like we're at a point of the season where rank is kind of really, in my mind, more than it would be otherwise. Do we need to protect our rank, chase rank? What's your feelings on that?
I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve with your lineup each week. If you're like Tom and I, where you're looking at the global ranking, you're in a position of some strength, I tend to play more conservatively. But if you're P2, P3 in a private league, you only have 4 races after this, you want to make a stand. Sometimes it's got to be no guts, no glory. with your lineup selection. So I do respect that if some of you are going for some of the more heavily invested lineups in Mercedes or Ferrari this week. That makes a lot of sense. Let's go back to the chat here. I see a bunch of questions about Limitless, which is where my head is at and where Rob's head is at as well. So Limitless this week, I think the biggest concern I have is if McLaren are the number 2 constructor again, I'm basically using the Limitless chip to sub in Lewis Hamilton for a budget driver. And that's not much of a use for Limitless. But at the same time, if I hold it for Interlagos, we show up in 2 weeks and there's rain, some sort of changing condition, a reshuffling of the grid. All of a sudden, I'm really strung out because then you have Vegas, which is a brand new race. We have no data on it. And then Abu Dhabi at the end. A lot of battles have already been decided, or you may have some teams really going full beans and possibly risking a big accident for the sake of moving up in the standings. So I'm almost completely committed to using Limitless this week. But a good question from Jamie in the chat. Tom, maybe we'll get your opinion first on this. If you have both 3X and Limitless, what would you pick for this week?
If I had both left, then I'd be kind of laughing because it's like I'm in top 1,000 with two amazing chips left. But no, I'm not in that situation. I only have 3 times. But if I did have both, I would if I had both, I'd probably be using the 3 times now, I think, because it's kind of the safer time to use it. I think Kota in the dry is a safer track, kind of much wider runoff area. Like we saw what happened with Piastri in FP1, where he went off the track. Almost a massive collision, but saved it because of the extra little bit of runoff. If that's in Brazil, then he's in the grass, he's in the barrier. It's a DNF. It's a lot more high risk in Brazil, in my opinion, particularly with the weather, which is very variable and tropical and could be a downpour. So I feel like if I have both chips, 3 times DRS is where I'm at. Not to say that Limitless isn't a good choice this weekend. I think it looks like it should be a decent chance, particularly with only 5 race weekends left. I think now is probably, if you've got it, is a good time to use it. But if I had both chips, I'd be looking at 3 times and then saving the Limitless most likely for Brazil, where again, like I said, I expect Mercedes to be strong around there. So again, you could quite happiply triple up a Mercedes around Brazil using the Limitless. But yeah, for me personally, if I had both, like I say, 3 times today because of that kind of the safety aspect. Of course, you could also look at the other side of the coin if you're more of a gambler and less of the safe kind of manager, which I consider myself, and think grid penalties could be really close to a lot of drivers, like Verstappen and Norris, could be taking grid penalties, and that could fall in Brazil. And if it does fall, and you put the 3 times on Verstappen when he starts in like P10 or something, and he fights his way through, driver of the day, blah, 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 overtakes, positions gained, suddenly your 3X looks incredible. However, I just feel like it's too many eggs in that Brazilian basket, and it's a bit too high risk for me personally. So that's why I'm kind of going to go with the 3 times today. I just need to decide on who my 2 times is, which is what's giving me a headache.
That makes sense. And I would actually answer it the same way. If you have your 3X in your Limitless, I'd use the 3X this week, save Limitless for Brazil. I think there's going to be another strong showing from Mercedes. Their 1 win last year was at this track. Lewis is historically strong there too. I think that's your best chance. For someone like me that only has Limitless left of those 2 big chips, I'm using it earlier just to prevent buffer against any issues weather-wise or otherwise when we get to Brazil. I want to head over to some lineups. While you're in the FanAmp base submitting your lineup, don't forget the contest closes in 30 minutes. So tell us which Haas driver will score the most fantasy points this week. So Tom, let's look at these first 2 here. These are from our friend Mike. And it looks like he's trying something very similar to what you proposed earlier. A lineup where you squeeze Lewis in, but at a cost. So the team on the left has Piastri out, and you're running a weaker number 4 driver in Albon, and then you're bringing back Danny Rick, who is absolute steal at 4.5 million, by the way. And then the lineup on the right, where you're sacrificing the Red Bull constructor for the sake of getting Lewis in, then you keep the triple McLaren. What do you think of that?
Both these exact builds, minus Ricciardo for Sonoda, because I've got a bit more budget. I'm not sure exactly what. Can't quite afford on that left side. You've got 0 budget left. But yeah, both these builds have been heavily playing on my mind. And the build on the left with the Hamilton, Albon, Ricciardo build, like I say, Ricciardo would be Sonoda in my team. But both that build is kind of almost where I'm at the moment with 40 minutes until deadline comes. That's kind of where I'm at, using the triple DRS, obviously, on Max Verstappen and 2 times in Lewis Hamilton. It does come at the price of dropping Piastri. However, if we're going to drop Piastri at some point this year, it looks like now might be a good time. And we've still got him covered of the McLaren constructor if he does have a good race. So kind of damage limitation a bit there. Lots of limitless chip users, so lots of people will be off Piastri this weekend anyway. So, dropping them out this weekend for an Albon who's looked fairly decent, to be fair, in FP1 isn't such a bad loss. So yeah, definitely think that build on the left is kind of where I'm leaning towards at the moment, unless I want to, like I say, go more drastic and just pile in on Mercedes constructor. But yeah, I definitely like the build on the left there from you, Mike. The build on the right with the Ferrari constructor, if you watch my team selection video earlier in the week, was actually almost exact build I put on there as well with Ferrari constructor. And then I've thought about it more and more through the week. And I just think that although it looks really good and you get to keep the triple McLaren, just dropping Red Bull, the more and more I think about it, dropping Red Bull just feels wrong. Even though Perez hasn't been performing well, all it takes is Perez to either A, have a really good race just out of the blue and suddenly Red Bull is scoring over 100 points, or Perez to just have a reasonable race. As long as he doesn't DNF, then fine. Then Verstappen will carry Red Bull beyond what Ferrari are capable of. And then even if Perez DNFs, like we've seen in a couple of races in a row now, Verstappen's strength still keeps Red Bull constructor afloat. Whereas if that sort of thing happens with Ferrari, when you see Carlos Sainz DNS in last weekend, I can't remember exactly what Ferrari scored, but it was a pretty low score. I'm thinking like less than 20 or something off the top of my head. So when that sort of incident happens to a constructor other than Red Bull, it hurts them big time. So I think dropping Red Bull constructor for me, I've ruled that out. Red Bull constructor staying with me. As I've already stated, like Perez, I think might be all right this weekend. And as long as he has a reasonable weekend, doesn't have to set the world on fire, then Red Bull constructor will probably be the best. And I don't think dropping them is a good idea.
I'm in the same boat. And Mike actually sweetened the pot on team number 1. He just said in the chat, I can run team 1 with autopilot. So if Lewis finds himself in a great spot, possibly on the podium, get driver of the day, steal the fastest lap, any of this stuff to get him ahead of Verstappen, that makes that first lineup terrific. And I agree with your main point on the team on the right. I think this addressed Canner's question in the chat, dropping Red Bull for the sake of getting Lewis in. I would say, yeah, it's somewhere between Perez is due to come back, and even if he doesn't, Max can carry that constructor sort of by himself. It's not worth it, in my opinion. And then if it fails on you, then you have to do a lot of gymnastics to get your team right for Mexico. And then all of a sudden you're taking -4 just to get a somewhat decent lineup again. Let's move on to the next team. This is from Ziggy Jam, and very similar lineup, only he's going with George Russell here. I like this team. I like this team. So you have an upgraded Mercedes with the new floor, a heavily upgraded Haas, something with the new letterbox inlets, the gills for cooling the engine that the Alpine have. They've got the water slide side pods like Ferrari. Haas are really out for blood this weekend.
Yeah, it has definitely looked good. And if I go with the kind of wild team selection using Mercedes as a constructor, then I would likely be picking Hülkenberg as that kind of second budget option. But this team doesn't need to do that because it's using McLaren as a constructor. And yeah, I like this build, and it's very similar to, again, one of the kind of 3 I narrowed it down to. The only exception is I have Guan Yu Zhou instead of Hülkenberg because my budget allows it. But because Ziggy here doesn't quite have the budget, I think Hülkenberg looking pretty good in that upgraded Haas. He qualifies well in general, and if that Haas can kind of sort out its issues with in terms of race pace, tire degradation, then Hülkenberg could certainly be a really good budget option. I think this build looks pretty decent. Again, it's on similar lines to what I'm thinking.
A related question in the chat from USAC, talking about budget drivers, Hülkenberg or Ricciardo? I can't believe I'm saying this, but give me Nico Hülkenberg.
Yeah, it's the upgrade. It's the upgrade, isn't it? It's changed things around.
And I think particularly with Ricciardo, he's had 1 hour back in the car in the last month. So I think while Ricciardo will look pretty good come the end of the season, I just want to have lower expectations in his very first race back. But I
Yeah.
get it on the other side. If 4.5 million is so beautiful, it opens up other things on your team. I can see why you do that too.
Yep.
And a note over to our producer, Greg. Greg, can you fire up a poll to see if I can get some help with my big roster problem? Before we get to the next lineup, the problem that I'm dealing with is what should my second constructor be if I run Limitless? Should it be McLaren or Ferrari or Mercedes? I'm convinced that Red Bull should stay locked into my team, but I don't know who to do as my second constructor. If I run with McLaren, is that even worth Limitless? If I do Mercedes, they've never had a fastest pit stop all year. Do I go with Ferrari? Then I'm really over-indexing on Ferrari if I run both drivers and the constructor and something happens. So risk all the way around. Tom, do you have a solution for me?
In terms of the constructor, yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that you can't see my screen at the moment, but on my screen is my team, and I keep flicking between like different builds. And on my screen at the moment, with 0.1 in the bank, is without Limitless. Bear in mind, this my constructors are Red Bull and Mercedes. Looking at this build, I'll just run through the team as you can't actually see it. It's Red Bull plus Mercedes, Verstappen, obviously, George Russell, Lando Norris, and then my two budget guys, Guan Yu Zhou and Hulkenberg. I think the team looks really surprisingly good, actually, considering Hulkenberg's like upgrades. And I feel I'm not entirely happy having like two budget drivers in there, but I don't know. I just have a good feeling about Mercedes this weekend and going forward. For Limitless chip users, obviously, if you move off McLaren for Limitless, then you're getting them back anyway, and you can decide what you want to do in Mexico next week. So you kind of don't have that dilemma right now, whereas I'm kind of committing to it in terms of changing my team structure going forward. And if I want to get back to McLaren, it could be difficult. But yeah, I think the Mercedes constructor certainly looks tempting. You do have a good point about the whole pit stop thing, and the McLarens are like a world record out in Qatar, are certainly good for gaining those extra points. It's definitely a nice little bonus. But in terms of race points, qualifying points, is Mercedes now the priority, particularly for Limitless holders? I think I feel like if I had Limitless this weekend, I would pretty strongly be for using Mercedes over McLaren. Not just because Limitless kind of gives you that option just to, splash the cash and spend that money just because you can. I don't think, you want to try and maximize points, not just spending cash for the sake of it. But I genuinely think that, building into this weekend all week, the McLaren camp have been pretty negative, saying we're not going to be as strong here. It doesn't quite suit us. The slow speed stuff's going to hurt us. It's a bumpy track. That's going to hurt us. We're not really sure. It's a bit of an unknown, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of negativity, although they're not saying like, oh, we're suddenly going to be P5. They think they're not going to be clear P2. They think they're going to be much more in the fight of Mercedes and Ferrari. So why not, with your Limitless chip, take that gamble with Mercedes, with that upgraded car. Lewis, like I said, is already like a king around this track. So covering Lewis kind of, I'd imagine most Limitless users also have Lewis in their kind of main driver team as well. So just doubling up on Lewis Hamilton that way also is very appealing. For me, if I had Limitless, I would be going with Mercedes. And the fact that I don't have Limitless and I'm still considering potentially going Mercedes,
that tells you a lot.
Quite a lot, I think. I think it says a lot, yeah.
All right, we got one vote in. Feel free to answer in the chat or in the poll which team I should run. I'm always leaning toward Mercedes. You see me wearing some sort of Mercedes shirt on every one of our shows, so I'm happy to run them big time. We had a question in the FanAmp base from Harrison F. Hood. He said, Sainz didn't look great in FP1, but neither did Russell. For Limitless, 3x Merc, or hedge my bets with Sainz instead of Russell. Right now, for me, in a Limitless lineup, I'm leaning Sainz instead of Russell because of his recent form and because he took pole on this track last year versus Russell, who I've already covered off potentially with Mercedes as my constructor. Interestingly, it was Russell who yeeted Sainz at the apex of turn one last year that sort of ruined Sainz's weekend. Tom, what do you think about that?
I'm not going to lie. I was just daydreaming about my team for a second there. Can you repeat the question?
Hey, that's okay. In a Limitless team, Russell versus Sainz.
Right. Okay. Sure. From what we've seen, and in kind of my thoughts pre FP1 and my thoughts post FP1, I think Russell definitely. Although Sainz looks good around here, looks comfortable. He's in form. He's comfortable in that kind of understeery Ferrari. And I think Ferrari should be okay here as well. I don't think they're going to be phenomenal, but I think they're going to be decent. But it does concern me about the actual race pace and the tire deg in particular for the Ferraris. And again, like I've already touched on the reliability. Whereas Russell in that, like I say, upgraded Mercedes just gives me a little bit more confidence, even though he's not quite as on form as what Sainz is. But I just have a good feeling about Mercedes today and kind of going forward. And if your last decision on Limitless is like picking Sainz versus Russell, if it was me, I think I'd be going for George Russell this weekend, to cut a long story short.
The judges are split, but I think that tells me there's no wrong decision. Like, I'm between Russell and Sainz myself, and I'm not terribly beat up over it. I think I'm either going to be right or slightly less right.
Yeah,
So,
again, they're probably going to score fairly similarly. As long as they both don't finish, as long as they don't both DNF, for example, they should score fairly similarly. I just feel slightly more comfortable with that Mercedes in terms of their race pace. Just feels more like a comfort blanket, whereas Ferrari give me slightly more cause concern. Although I do think Ferrari's still going to be decent, so I don't think it's a bad thing to go with Sainz.
there are a few of you in the chat asking what lineups would look like without the Limitless chip. Let's go back over to some of our lineup reviews, because I'm seeing a few in here that are chipless that might give you some good examples of what to look for. So this is Florida Man Steven. Thank you for submitting your lineup, Florida Man. And you can see what he's done here is no Red Bull and no McLaren constructor, double AlphaTauri, double Red Bull. That's one way to put your trust back in Perez, is to take out the Red Bull constructor and then use that extra budget to bump up to Ferrari and Mercedes. To me, this feels like if you were stuck, the top places in your league are consistently running Red Bull and McLaren, and you've got to do something wild with 4 races left. This is a good way to bust out of it.
Yep.
But for me, let's just say I don't think Tom in the top 1,000 would wager his stake in the top, 0.5% in the world to go this far off the reservation, because if it's wrong, you've got a lot of undoing to do before Mexico with only 2 transfers.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a good point about the whole ranking thing. If you kind of are languishing a little bit in your mini league and not global rank isn't quite there, then a team like this could be a decent gamble. But if you're putting Perez in as a driver, then it just doesn't make sense to me to not also include the Red Bull constructor. If you have faith in Perez to put him in your driver slot, why not also put the Red Bull, or at least instead put the Red Bull constructor in, where you're also kind of effectively doubling up on Max Verstappen? So I personally don't like this. You're kind of, I don't know, if you're sat watching the race, you're kind of thinking, oh, I hope Perez does well. Then you're thinking, well, actually, do I hope Perez does well? Because then the Red Bull constructor is going to score well, and I don't have the Red Bull constructor. And suddenly you're like, oh, you're kind of two minds about it, and you're kind of in no man's land. So you kind of need to commit to Perez and Red Bull or not, I would say. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of that team, I'm sorry to say.
Well, that's why it's here. Our fans put it out there so we can give some advice, and hopefully, you still have 25 minutes to try to move things around or find some alternatives. And we're happy to talk you through that.
Oh, I've just seen in the chat, that's Florida Man in the chat saying that he's doing this to stay number 1 at the top as he can't afford Red Bull. I feel like you could afford Red Bull if you drop Perez and then upgraded one of your budget drivers, most likely. So if you want to stay on top, I would say Red Bull is a good way to stay on top, personally. Just throw that in there.
I'm of the same mind. If you're in first place, I would try to do something just a little bit safer than this. I'd hate for you to do something that's terribly off the reservation. You get a DNF from either Ferrari or Mercedes that none of your other league mates have because they're playing it safer with Red Bull, McLaren. And then all of a sudden you're in no man's land. Rob and I had talked earlier in the week, the difference between P1 and P3 in a sprint weekend is usually 40 to 50 points. So if you get it wrong, that's a huge swing. Let's keep flying through some teams. We've got about 4 or 5 teams left in maybe 6 or 7 minutes to do it. Reminder, we've got 15 minutes left in the contest if you haven't told us which Haas driver is going to score the most points this week. So lineup from BS Karts. And you could see a lineup here with Alonso, Piastri, Hulkenberg. So this one to me, I'm a little bit nervous about Alonso here just because we have no data on those Aston upgrades. It looks like your top 3 or 4 constructors are pretty locked in. You have Williams and Haas looking pretty good in the upper middle. And I'm just worried that Alonso's going to get the squeeze out of the elite drivers this week.
Yeah, I mean, this team is pretty much template minus Alonso for Piastri. Like, if you could afford, actually, you can actually afford Piastri, that isn't it? Because Piastri is cheaper than Alonso. So, although Alonso is an awesome driver and everything, Aston Martin I would just avoid. Even though I imagine Alonso will be kind of fine this weekend, it certainly doesn't excite me. I think Piastri's got more potential in this race and going forward, even though McLaren don't look quite as strong as they have done in recent races. So I feel like quite a simple fix there would be to just swap out Alonso for Piastri personally. And then you're kind of sat with the team that I'm kind of considering anyway. And then you just got to decide, do you want to stick with Perez or not? But if you're not using the triple DRS, then you don't have to worry about the 2 times DRS. And therefore this team kind of looks all right. But if you're going to use a triple DRS on this team, then I think I wouldn't be going with this, because that means you're kind of forced to put it on Perez, which I really don't like the look of. So overall, I feel this team's fine, but I'm not really sure why you would go Alonso over Piastri.
So he has this is Piastri here.
Oh my god! Okay, I have just spent like the last minute thinking that's Lando Norris looking straight.
No, that's okay, but then basically you do the inverse, right? You could downgrade Perez to upgrade Alonso into Lando, and then this is looking like a fairly normal team again. I think between Perez,
I'm really sorry. I'm completely.
That's okay.
I saw orange and I was like, oh, it's Lando Norris.
Between moving Perez to Sainz, Hulkenberg to Ricciardo, you should have enough, and then you got a little left over too. That should give you enough to get Alonso into Lando, and then you have a pretty comfortable, safe team there too.
Yep.
All right. Caroline MC has almost the team we just talked about. A really nice, safe, even build, using that extra budget for Ricciardo to have a nice full team, or Limitless. I would say, Caroline, if you have only Limitless, I plan on running it this week rather than taking my chances in Interlagos if weather or something else sends us down a different path. So I'm going to reveal where my Limitless team is at in just a minute or two, and then we'll lock in our lineups. I would say Limitless number 1 with something similar to what I'm about to show you. And then this lineup you have here is, I think, totally fine for that budget. Tom, any concerns with Caroline's team here?
No, again, it's very similar to kind of the teams that I'm considering. I should probably actually look a bit more closely rather than just look at the colors and think, oh yeah, I know who that is, but no. I think the constructors look solid. McLaren, everyone's jumping off McLaren like it's the sinking ship, but actually they're still really strong. So I think going McLaren constructor is probably still fine. Carlos Sainz over Russell is, again, a question mark for me. I think I'll go Russell. In fact, I would go Russell, but I do think Carlos Sainz is still fine. And I think this team is absolutely fine. It depends what you want to do with your Limitless chip. It depends if you want to, save it for Brazil and hope for better, or even use it on a non-sprint weekend, like what happened back in Monza when lots of people used it and then it worked out. You don't have to use it on a sprint weekend, but if you're not going to use Limitless now, have a plan to use it in the next, four races. Otherwise, you're going to waste it. So, I think this team is absolutely fine. If we just ignored chips for a second and that was your team, I think absolutely fine. But because you've got the Limitless chip, now might be a good time to use it.
Agreed. One last thing that we haven't talked about with McLaren is that Ryder updated his pre-qualifying sims, and recently F1 Fantasy Tools has included potential price gains. And this sim has been pretty spot on the last few weeks. The 3 McLaren assets are still among the very top to gain value after this week. So a thought, if this was your team from Qatar and you apply Limitless, this is the team that's going to be building value moving on. So you could do a Limitless team that is light on McLaren, and then if they do well, they get those price gains. You're still going to have them for Mexico. So that's another factor in my Limitless lineup.
Yeah, I feel
Oh
like
boy.
Daniel Ricciardo is going to go up as well. Surely he can't stay at
Oh,
4.5.
absolutely. I've got a whole speech about how great Danny is at Mexico that I'm saving for next week. All right, let's do a little bit of lightning round, Tom. In the next 30 seconds or so, let's see if we can get through a couple more of these lineups so everyone can
Okay.
have
Yeah.
their
I'll
fill.
try and be quick. I'll try and be quick because you know what I'm like. I start talking and that's it.
It looks like we got Max Verstappen's cousin here, Conor Stappen, and this is a very similar build to something you showed us earlier. There's Lewis and the Mercedes constructor in
Yep.
lieu of what looks like probably Perez and the Red Bull constructor from some other teams we've seen. I'm a little nervous about moving on from Red Bull, but of the permutations that get you there, I think I feel the most comfortable given how good Mercedes looks this weekend.
Yep. I think Mercedes definitely look good. However, I've said it already in the stream. I would not be dropping off Red Bull constructor. Obviously, that enables you to bring in Lewis Hamilton. It depends how much you want Lewis Hamilton in here, to be honest. And if you're using, like I say, the 3 times and the 2 times, then Lewis Hamilton seems like a great option. This could still be a good option. I personally would prefer Red Bull constructor, though. I think they're just kind of a given, to be honest.
And I think there are some ways you could get back to, if you had Red Bull in there, you could then downgrade Norris or Piastri since you still have a piece of them with the McLaren constructor. So this lineup is fine, but there are a few other ways you could get out of it and still look pretty safe. All right. Here's a lineup from Luis on FanAmp. I'm loving the love for Lewis this week. I think a lot of folks are inspired by your earlier lineup, Tom. You put Lewis in, you go double budget driver. We haven't seen a lot of lineups with Zhou in, but it should go without saying that this guy is an overtake master. I'm going to go one tab over to remind you all. Overtakes in 2022, Coda is right up at the top with Interlagos. So I expect a lot of Zhou overtaking this weekend.
Yep, definitely. And that's kind of another bonus to me sticking with my kind of template team and just sticking George Russell in for Perez. It means I get to keep Guan Yu Zhou and get those Zhou overtakes. Because he's kind of moving out of the budget range in a way because he's up to the 7 million kind of mark. But yeah, I definitely like this team. Double budget is a bit iffy, but it's still a team I'm kind of considering myself with the double budget, using Mercedes as a constructor. Definitely like the Lewis Hamilton pick. Overall, I would say this team is a solid team. Yeah.
It is a perfectly fine chip-free team.
Yeah.
And then similarly, George Russell in that number 2 spot ahead of Sainz, ahead of Sergio Perez. And this is very similar to some of the conversations we had earlier. I imagine this gets the Tom stamp of approval too.
Yep, because again, it's very similar to what I am considering. One way or another, I'll tell you now, I'm going to have a Mercedes asset in my team going into this deadline, which is literally in just a few minutes, actually. We're closing in and to be a bit careful I don't randomly miss it. But yeah, I do think that this team looks pretty good. And like I say, it's very close to a team I'm considering. The only difference would be, as we've just discussed, Guan Yu Zhou over Hulkenberg for me, because my budget allows it. But if your budget doesn't allow you to get that extra couple of million, then Hulkenberg looks like a good kind of punt this weekend. We know he's good at qualifying and the Haas is upgraded, so who knows what he can do. Yeah, looks like a good team to me.
Orlab, I co-sign too. Go with that one. We've got Luke-a-thon. And so Luke is a consistent listener on the show, one of the top players in the world at the moment. So thank you, Luke, for sending us in your lineups. I hope you continue to dominate in the world rankings. This is basically a Lewis lineup and a Russell lineup. So Tom, put both halves of your brain against each other. Which one would you go with?
Well, this is what I need to decide in the next 16 minutes, more or less, because looking at the screen right now is literally the 2 builds that I'm considering, like driver for driver, constructor for constructor. There is obviously that third alternative build where I'm looking to kind of go all in on Mercedes, but again, I feel like that build is a bit too out there when kind of, Luke in particular, if he's top or second top in the world, whatever he is at the moment, I feel like it's an unnecessary risk probably to drop McLaren off the face of off the face of a cliff. So yeah, those two builds on screen right now are literally the two remaining builds that I'm considering. So if you want a straight answer for me, the answer is I'm still stressing over the answer because I haven't decided yet. I like the overall balance of the first team on the left better, because it kind of keeps that structure of the triple McLaren. If they do well, then you're kind of sorted. You get those price rises if they do well again. You get to get Guan Yu Zhou, who is the best budget option by a country mile so far this season. And you get a bit of Mercedes coverage with George Russell. And for me, using the two, I don't know if Luke's using the triple. I think he's already used his triple from what I remember him saying before. If I was tripling up, I'd feel okay about putting it on Russell. The main thing that's kind of pulling me towards the team on the right with Lewis Hamilton for me is because I got that triple DRS to use. And Lewis Hamilton, in my opinion, is probably just the best option for that 2 times. So the question really becomes, it's effectively, what is it? It's Piastri, Zhou, and Russell versus Hamilton, Albon, Tsunoda. Is Hamilton going to outscore Russell by that much? Because he needs to, because I'd anticipate Piastri and Zhou to do better than Albon and Tsunoda. So you're really leaning heavily on Hamilton, the team on the right. But for me personally, because I'm going to potentially 2 times Hamilton, well, I would 2 times Hamilton if I went with that team, it feels like it might be worth it. But then I could just play it safe and go with the team on the left and 2 times Russell and just be like, accept a reasonable score. As long as he doesn't DNF, then I'll be kind of happy and just get the triple DRS out of the way now. That's what it's become for me. So yeah, both solid teams, and they're kind of what I'm deciding between right now.
I think so. I'm of the same mind. If I'm in Tom's position where I'm considering 2xing Lewis, I think that gap between Lewis and George times 2 makes that second team worth it. If I'm Luke, where you're not adding the modifier, I think Piastri and Zhou, that combined effect will outscore Alex and Yuki to more than cover that gap between him and Lewis. So if I'm Luke, I would probably go team 1. If I was Tom that was doubling somebody up, I would probably go team 2.
Yeah.
All right. I've got to cut to the chase since we're 3 minutes away from the contest. Hopefully we can get back to those last 2 teams in a moment. But it's time now to sort out my team. And I saw the results of the poll. The poll agrees. Almost 2/3 of you agree with Tom that this second constructor spot should be Mercedes. And I won't always put my fate in the hand of the people, but this week I will go with Mercedes.
Oh boy.
And lock it in as my second constructor. And so let's go back to my team. We'll walk through the drivers. Max, in obvious with the 2X chip. He's won the last 2 years here. Lewis, as I mentioned earlier, for anyone who missed it, never finished below P4, 3 straight P2 finishes. Charles, consistently P5, P6 at this track, looking good in FP1. Carlos took pole here last year. DNF after getting yeeted by Russell in turn 1, has never finished lower than P8. Lando only had a few races here, again, consistently either P7, P8, staying safe with the Red Bull constructor because Max by himself can carry the team. God forbid if something happens to Perez, Max can still handle it. If Perez has a resurgent week, I'm covering it with Red Bull. And then I'm trusting the Mercedes floor and I'm trusting the people. Give me the Mercedes constructor. Tom, we've got 2 minutes until we have to head to the contest. Should I start a drum roll for your team? Do you know what you're going to do?
I think I'm more or less there. I think I have to be more or less there because the deadline's on us and we've got competition still to do. So yeah, I think ultimately actually having that discussion with Luke's team on the screen has actually really helped me. And your point about the whole fact that I'm 2 times in someone because I'm using the triple DRS boost means I think that the Lewis build outweighs it. The only trouble is it means I have to use up 3 subs to do it, and then I'm kind of a little bit more restricted going into Mexico to get back. Although I can jump back because I've got like a 2.2 million. I worked this out earlier. I've got 2.2 million buffer to get back to a kind of George Piastri build by dropping Lewis and Albon, switching them out. So although I won't be able to get Guan Yu Zhou, Tsunoda's a good deputy in the budget slot for next weekend if I want to go back to that build. So although I'm kind of changing up quite a bit by bringing in Lewis Hamilton, I think because I'm using that triple DRS boost. I want the best possible option for the 2 times, and I have my utmost confidence in this, despite what happened in Qatar on lap 1 the other day. So yeah, I'm going to be locking that in. In fact, I kind of need to do that now because I'm going to run out of time with this competition as well. So I'm going to go this build. Red Bull, McLaren, Lewis is in there, tripled up on Verstappen, doubled up on Lewis. And then the kind of filler there is Norris, Albon, Tsunoda backing me up with 0.5 in the bank. So yeah, we're going to make those transfers now whilst you get set up for the competition, if you like.
Is this the most nervous you've been for a fantasy week all year? Because I'm feeling nervous, and I usually don't.
I'll be nervous when it comes to actually watching like qualifying, watching sprint, watching it, like especially with the 3 times on the line. You know, all it takes is a DNF from, well, obviously as I'm committing to Lewis and Max. If they DNF, it's going to be basically heartbreak. It's going to ruin my season and destroy my chances of getting into the top 1,000, I would imagine. However, if it all goes according to plan, Lewis and Verstappen get through unscathed and score well, then it might just cement my position in the top 1,000. So yeah, we're gonna go with it. It's been, like I said, I've been screenshotting my teams throughout the week, and this team keeps coming back. I scroll through, I keep seeing this team with Lewis, Albon, Tsunoda in there. So I've got the three subs to use. It doesn't cost me any extra points, so we're going to do that now. Tsunoda, so that's confirmed now.
Don't make any mistakes.
In my chip. No, I'm just locking in the 2 times here now as well.
Just adding this to Twitter or X or whatever you call that these days to make sure everybody else sees my team. I am not going back on it now. Phew. All right. Now, without further ado, let's get to that contest. I've got the entries copied here. We're going to head over to our wheel of names over here. Hopefully that all drops in. Okay, let's hit that wheel. And the winner is... Ooh.
Good luck pronouncing that.
I'm going to try it. Mulayaman. I'm going to try that. And if you're in the chat, Mulayaman, do feel free to correct me and phonetically spell it out for me. All right. Tom, we got some more work to do. I see some more teams that we hadn't gotten to yet. Let's see if I can muscle through them while you wrap up your lineup. So this is Leaps Frog. Ooh, Leaps Frog. I love that team on the left. You've got Russell in for Perez, Zhou as your budget driver. You must have a decent budget on you because I can't quite afford that. So I would pick the team on the left over Perez, who's desperate for a good week. Daniel Ricciardo's only had an hour in the car. Give me the team on the left.
I agree with that one.
Over to Murgy 165. This is a very similar team. Looks like Murgy might have a lower budget than some of the other teams, running Russell and Norris and then going double budget driver. I think this is fine for me. You've got plenty of coverage on McLaren. Zhou, if you're going to have a budget driver, go with one of the best. K-Mag is one of the top overtake drivers on the grid in a very revamped car. Looked fine in FP1. I think for that budget, you're doing just fine with that. And Mike is back. He's left the chat, but he dropped one last lineup. I think it was just to tell us that he is locked in the lineup he shared earlier. And he's locked it in with the autopilot.
Well, more or less the same one. Ricardo out for Tsunoda. Nice one, Mike. Good luck.
Fantastic, Mike. I hope it takes you places, and hopefully it's mostly from Lewis so that we can all benefit too. Awesome. Folks in the chat, is there any question that we haven't answered that you want to hear in these last 6 minutes?
Yep, far away.
Luke is fielding questions from his fans in the chat. Yeah, Luke is P2 in the world right now. We're coming for you, Luke. And then Leaps Frog is 196 in the world. Good for you. That's fantastic. I finished 898 last year, and I felt like an Olympic athlete. So I can only imagine how the two of you feel. Tom, would you have Lando or Perez?
I'm just reading that one. In a limitless team. Ooh, tough one.
You believe in Perez. How much do you believe in Perez?
I do, but if it's between him and Lando, I think Lando I have a lot more faith in Lando at the moment. He looked pretty decent in FP1 despite not seeing that soft runner. So, you know, with 5 minutes to go, if that was my last decision, I think I'd go Lando. I don't quite trust Perez, but as long as you're covered him with the Red Bull constructor, then yeah, go Lando.
Yeah, if Perez has a resurgent week, I won't feel too bad about myself. He had the 9th mean race pace last time out in the same machinery as Verstappen. He was 80 seconds behind him, totally out of sorts with track limits. And we know Sector 3 at COTA has some track limits issues. They were hinting at that in FP1. So give me the safer driver and the more consistent one. Luke has locked it in. He just posted in the chat. Verstappen, Russell, Norris, Joe Piastri. So fully loaded, best possible budget driver. You got a piece of Mercedes.
Yeah, well that's done, what Luke. I would have done. That's what I would have done, Luke, if I didn't have the triple, but I got the triple. I'm using the triple. I want Lewis in there as a double. That's why I've gone a bit alternative to you. But yeah, I would have done the same otherwise.
That's good. Looks like we all helped each other out on that. Kevin in the chat says he has triple McLaren, triple Red Bull, and Yuki. Would I change anything? He thinks about changing Checo for Russell. Oh, yeah. 9 out of 10 dentists agree. Change Checo for Russell this week. Give me that new floor for Mercedes over the recent shaky history of Perez.
Yep. Mark my words, though. Perez is going to have a good weekend. Just saying.
Just to spite us. Yeah. Now, I guess for those of you that are trying Limitless that have been a sucker for Perez like I have, he is in your back pocket. So if he has a huge week, you'll have him to start the week off in Mexico, and you'll also get the price increase from Perez because he was in your previous lineup. So a little bit of a hedge there too.
Nicola's in there asking Sainz or Russell. We did cover that earlier, and I personally think Russell over Sainz, but I think didn't you go with Sainz over Russell? You did, didn't you?
Yes, I said Sainz over Russell, but really, Nicola, it's 1A, 1B for me. I don't think I'm not so passionately against Russell in this. I think he'll do just well. All right, it looks like we have made it through all of the questions. We've got 2 minutes to get to the couch and fire up qualifying. Tom, thank you again for another action-packed hour.
Yeah,
I've sweat sufficiently through my Lewis shirt here. Fingers crossed for a good qualifying today.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much for having me again. Lots of chips flying all over the place. Let's hope they come out nice and golden come Sunday evening for me in the UK. But yeah, good luck to everyone this weekend. There's one last question actually from Jess there. Russell Orlando for Limitless. Ooh, that's a tough one. That's a really tough one. Very quickly off the top of my head, I would say Russell. Oh, I don't know.
Same.
Russell.
It looks like McLaren's hiding something by not running softs at all in FP1. Give me Russell.
Great stuff.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the show today. We will see you next week for Mexico.
Yep. Thank you very much.